G'day folks, welcome again. Dan Clark from Arcane Botanica. Just continuing this lecture series. This is lecture 3 on what will be a series of 4 lectures on the Eucalypts of Australia. We've gone through just the 3 genera in lecture 1, went through Angophora in number 2, and this is number 3, which is going to be on Corymbia, the Bloodwoods. It's a bit late in the day. It's actually about 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon for me. It's well and truly beer o'clock. But I've been having so much fun with these that I just thought I'd stay busy, stay motivated, and try and punch it out and see how we go. So this is the Corymbias or the Bloodwoods. And what we have to remember is these used to be classified as eucalyptus, so they got the synonymous name of eucalyptus and whatever the species is. As far as I've been involved with plants, and if I go right back to the year 2000 and my illustrious bushland regeneration career in Sydney, I've always known them as Corymbias. I've never known these trees as eucalyptus. But if you look at some older references, and one I can think of is the old Les Robertson Field Guide to the Native Plants of Sydney, especially edition 1, you'll see them referred to as eucalyptus or listed or named as eucalyptus in those books. So just be aware of that, those synonymous names. So they did used to be eucalyptus. The paper that changed them, the publication, was done in about 1995. It was done by 2 really good botanists at the Botanic Gardens, New South Wales. It was highly controversial, I understand. They actually copped a lot of flack from it, especially from horticultural circles and the wider plant-loving community. I think even politicians weighed in on it and were sort of thinking we were going to lose this name eucalyptus. It's so Australian, and yet it was going to be lost in the process of updated science, and that wasn't the case. We've still got a ton of species in eucalyptus, but a whole heap of species were changed, a whole heap of new species were recognised as Corymbia. And that name just basically means the flowers are more or less arranged in the corym, an inflorescence called a corym, which is sort of almost like a broad umbrella-like shape. If you think of a piece of cauliflower or a piece of broccoli, to me, that's a really good sort of picture of a corym, where all the flowers can sort of emerge from different levels at the base, but all sort of meet up on different length sort of pedicels or peduncles to get to an equal sort of level at the top. So that's what we mean by corym. So we'll dive into it. Just get my pointer working here. Yeah, so we've got anywhere from 95 to 115 species. This is the paper published by Ken Hill and Laurie Johnson. It's a massive piece of work. Would have taken absolutely ages, I reckon, to do. And unfortunately, sadly, those 2 guys have died. You know, we've lost them several years ago. If you're familiar with Laurie Johnson, I think he was one of the directors of the Botanic Gardens, Sydney, and the herbarium. Ken Hill published the Wallamai Pine. So they were really prominent botanists, really good on their eucalypts as well, and a really good understanding of phylogenetics and all that sort of stuff. I think they recognised about 113 species. And so, look, around 115 have been stated on some websites, and anywhere down to 95. So I'm assuming that's where some people might consider some species to be actual subspecies, and that might reduce the number of taxa. But either way, that's how much we've got. As I said late in lecture 1, just watch this space. There's moves to change this again. We'll moan and groan, but all the Corymbia together just don't sit too well. They're broken up into groups, and they've all got a few inconsistent features. And again, the evolutionary relationships come into it. So we could see this broken up again with some movement of some species into a new genus perhaps, and movement of some species maybe into Angophora, heaven forbid. So that's where we're going. I'm in New South Wales. that's my focus. I've only got 10 species to worry about, so that's that's really good. A lot of Corymbia occur in the tropical parts of Australia. So we're talking like northern Queensland, the Northern Territory, the far inland parts of those places, Western Australia as well, and probably a large part of that state. And what they even state in this paper, I had a quick flick through it just before this lecture, is some of the populations for some of the species are hard to get to. They're really hard to get to and sample, whether they're in tropical savanna or swamps or crocodile infested, rivers. I'm not too sure, but they're very hard to sample in some cases. So yeah, that's just something to take note. But good for me. I've only got 10 to sort of get to know, unless I'm going to go work somewhere else. But just recapping some things from lecture 1, and I've got a bit of additional information from this paper too, which I'll throw in, which might sort of correct some things from lecture 1. But this is pretty okay. Juvenile leaves are opposite, but they probably quite quickly go alternate. And the adult phase is clearly alternate for Corymbia, as far as I know. Again, I think the leaves are somewhat odorous. I don't think they're really strongly odorous. I was just crushing up some Corymbia gummifera earlier on. It's got a bit of a resinous smell, but I don't think it's anywhere near some of the eucalyptus species that you crush up. But they've got somewhat of an odor there. Now, with the flowers, we've still got this state of being conspicuously staminate with the petals and sepals fused into a bud cap. Now, what I've learnt from this today is sometimes a lot of the time you get two opercula or two calyptrae. The one that falls off on the outside is the fusion of the sepals, and then a second one falls off, which is a fusion of the petals. And I managed to capture this in the field this week. I'm going to show you in a couple of slides. But on some species, they actually describe the flowers having 5 free petals which aren't fused, but they're actually stuck to the inside of the calyptra, which is made from the fused sepals, and they fall off with it. So I'd really like to see a picture of that or a diagram. I'd like to look inside that bud cap, which is made up of the sepals, and see the free petals inside. I assume they'd be sticking to the inside of that cap. So some of the species in Corymbia have that feature, and they get described as having free petals, but we never actually see the petals because they fall off because they're stuck into the inside of the bud cap. So that's really cool, and I'd really love to see it. But I Googled today and I couldn't find any drawings of that. Maybe if anyone sees some, you can put them in the comments. So I think we're pretty safe there. I don't want to make it, I'm trying not to make it too complicated. So this is more for the lay person and the non-taxonomist and us who are out there just trying to identify these trees. But that's really interesting what these guys talk about. Still got the same deal here. The capsule, it's got a sunken disc and deeply inserted or enclosed valves, and everyone seems to agree on that. The valves are well and truly down in there, never sticking out here, and the seeds are down there and they'll pop out, and well nicely protected in these woody capsules. They've got this typical sort of urn shape a lot of the time. You'd call it like, maybe, I don't know, you'd know better than me, an old-fashioned Egyptian urn or Greek urn or something like that. Something a potter would make, perhaps. It really mimics those sort of pottery artifacts that are made by humans. It's just that beautiful urn shape. A lot of them have that distinctive shape, and sometimes they've got longitudinal lines, a bit like the Angophoras, but they tend to be more like lines rather than raised ribs. A few more things here, again, which comes from this paper that I'll throw in. I did say Corymbia tend to have inflorescences that are terminal. That's the case a lot of the time, but some of them also have axillary inflorescences. There's just a few that have flowers produced in the leaf axils, and that again causes a bit of incongruence in the whole Corymbia genus. There's just these differences. Another one of the differences that isn't here is the nature of the seeds. I think some seeds are winged and some aren't, and they sort of worry about that as well, that it looks like they're not as closely related as we might like because of these differences in the seeds. With the bark, you can get anything from smooth, so a gum, to full bark fibrous, as well as part barks. You can also get part barks in Corymbia. You can get like a sock of fibrous bark at the bottom, and then the rest of the trunk will be smooth. But there's a fair few with totally smooth trunks, and we'll see a few of those. And there's a fair few with full bark fibrous as well, but just know there's some part barks. So there's a lot of lining with eucalyptus here, where we can have terminal or axillary inflorescences and a whole nature of bark types. So that's it in a nutshell for Corymbia. But if you consult that paper, and there's about 300 odd pages there, the introduction part is pretty good. They just talk about some of the features. So I'm diving straight in. This is a common Sydney eucalypt called Corymbia gummifera, the red bloodwood. A very common tree you can find on the sandy areas, Hawkesbury sandstone areas around Sydney, and further afield, pretty much up and down the New South Wales coast. So it's got mainly a coastal hinterland distribution along the entire coast of New South Wales. So, you know, you might get some little gaps here and there, but if you go from the Victorian border to the Queensland border, stick to the coastal and coastal inland areas. It's a very common tree. It goes to about Bundaberg in Queensland, and it's confined to sort of far eastern Victoria, around this sort of region here, Maculata, East Gippsland. I tend to find it in sandy areas a lot of the time, Hawkesbury sandstone. Sometimes it's on enriched soils. It can get right up onto the lateritic ridge tops. You can possibly find it on some shale sandstone transition forest and possibly some more enriched soils, but it usually prefers really sandy or sandstone areas. Tree to 30 metres tall. The biggest ones I've seen tend to be down the south coast of New South Wales in some very nice intact dry sclerophyll woodlands or forest. Around Sydney they can get pretty big as well, and maybe up north they can get big too, but they can get substantial trunks on them at times and easily get up to 20-25 metres. They do have a lignotuber, so they readily regenerate from fire. Here's just a distribution map. You can see where that is there. What's interesting is, again, I'd just like to talk about these maps. When you get records like that, excuse me, you might go and look that up and just see, oh, what's going on there? I looked up that record. It's in the wrong location. It's actually meant to be in Western Australia somewhere, possibly as a planted specimen, as far as I could tell. This record here is meant to be genuine. It's described really well, and that's where the record is. So if that was actually Corymbia gummifera, that one there, that would be very interesting because it's well and truly west of the western extent. I'm thinking it could have been a misidentification of another eucalypt that I know really well, which sort of has a trunk like Corymbia gummifera out this way. But you know, if they're right, they're right, and it means there's a patch of Corymbia gummifera if it's not planted out in this part of the world. But that's, you can see that's your general thrust of the extent. It's in New Zealand again. There's so many eucalypts in New Zealand, unnaturally, of course. Whether it's going weedy there, I'm not sure, but they'd definitely be planted trees over there. That's a beautiful shot of the bark, and that's generally what it looks like. A lot of Corymbias have this beautiful tessellated bark pattern, what we call tessellated, where it's like a sort of, you know, patch of polygons, bit of a jigsaw puzzle. You've probably heard of geological features called tessellated pavements. Yeah, it's just like a checkered sort of jigsaw pattern of fibrous bark. It goes right up to the top, right to the ends of the limbs, end of the branches. So it's a full bark. Just got some buds here. You can see they're mostly at the terminals. This is a real sort of terminal flowering species, and they tend to flower around, I see them in December, January, February is when they tend to be flowering their best. So definitely in summer. Tried to get some shots here. Here's a tree in a vegetation monitoring plot. It's with things like Banksia serrata, if you know that, and Lambertia. So it's a very sandy country. Whether there's been a fire or not, they seem to always have these black patches on them. And it's not always because of fire. To me, they just tend to have them. I think a lot of the time it might be due to flame scorch, but I had no idea when the last time this bushland burnt. But a lot of the time, they just have these black patches. So it's another good identifying feature for them. They're growing here with scribbly gums, things like Angophora costata, that could possibly be if it's not a scribbly gum. Things like Eucalyptus seabori. That's their sort of their main sort of companions a lot of the time. Some more blackened trunks here. That's a real typical look for Corymbia gummifera. And just in this area, I found these fruits which made me think I might have had a different Corymbia just compared to what I showed you earlier. But that's sort of the variation you get. And the area I was in, it was pretty impossible for it to be any other species, just given the geographic range of the others. But that's what some really old fruit look like. They tend to litter the ground pretty generously. You can always find them a lot of the time. Just another capture there. Now the bushland I'm in here, it hasn't burnt for ages, a long time anyway. And it's got these blackened spots. So I just don't think it's always due to fire. Possibly it is, but you know, I just don't know. It'd be good to get some comments on that. Some really common companions in the Sydney area for Corymbia gummifera are Angophora costata, which we saw in the last lecture. And in Hawkesbury sandstone gullies, you also get Eucalyptus piperita a lot. And those three trees, Angophora costata, Corymbia gummifera, Eucalyptus piperita, just love hanging out together in the Sydney sandstone country, especially once you start to go down the gullies. So you'll see those three quite often. Just some leaf shots. I don't put any dimensions in here or anything like that because you can always go look that up, that sort of thing, and there's a bit of overlap and a bit too much info. But you can see these, you know, get to about 15 centimeters long. They've got these nice red petioles, yellow midvein. That's the other side of one of these leaves, and they are described as discolorous. So you can see easily the two different tones there. I find they're very similar to Angophora costata, and I've got a site at the moment where I'm monitoring, and it's a really ecologically degraded site. It's a sort of a rehabilitated quarry, and they're just sort of letting the bushland try and regenerate naturally. There's tons of saplings about up to 1 metre tall of Corymbia gummifera, but there's the odd Angophora costata sapling as well. And I think the leaves look incredibly similar. It could be Corymbia gummifera. They're a bit more thickened. They're a bit more leathery. They're a bit fatter a lot of the time. But I'm just throwing out there that if we got a whole heap of Corymbia gummifera leaves and a whole heap of Angophora costata leaves and mixed them all up, and then asked people to separate them into piles, I reckon we'd all be challenged, I think. Some people happily to be enlightened on that, but I just think if you look at the leaves I had for Angophora costata, they're very similar. Again, just maybe go on the width, maybe go on the tough and leathery feel, and you might pull up a few other features too. That was just a close-up of the venation on the underside. Again, you can see it's a very Angophora-like and finely reticulate. It's really, really beautiful patterns on the underside. And just another shot there. And just here I'm showing that, yeah, maybe the flowers, well, when they turn into fruits there, they're not always terminal. I mean, maybe these ones were produced a bit more down in the leaf axils, but you can see these ones, they appear to be well and truly terminal, but you get the idea. Just note that totally alternate leaf arrangement. You should be looking at the leaves here and be able to tell that that's alternate. There's a leaf there. You know, I can't see any opposite leaves anywhere on this. If you look at those two there on this branch, you can even look at this one coming out that way and this one coming out up here. Purely alternate leaves, much more alternate compared to something like Angophora costata. So that's it for Corymbia gummifera. Beautiful plant, look out for it. Here's one that is probably one of the most prominent Corymbias of the genus. I think we'd all agree. Corymbia maculata, the spotted gum, with this beautiful patchy, smooth trunk. It's used extensively in landscaping and gardening. Well, it has in the past, and I've even seen some recent landscapes use it. It's one of these trees that if you plant it in a copse in a large, maybe landscaped, you know, boulevard or park or, you know, picnic area or something like that, you just get this beautiful effect where all the trees seem to grow at a uniform rate and they all sort of stick at the same height. It's sort of bizarre, but that's what they do. And they'll sort of look after each other and you know, they sort of all tend to do well and all agree they're going to grow at the same time in the same way. So it's a very popular tree in landscaping for that sort of thing. These can be very large, and I would like to be enlightened on this too, but I think they would be probably the largest of any Corymbia species. There could be one or two that get bigger, but these can get quite massive. Potentially 60 meters, and you know, if you've got a tree that big, it'll have a canopy spread to 20 meters or more. It's got a mostly coastal distribution in New South Wales, again from the southern to the northern border. It does extend west into the Hunter Valley through that sort of gap in the Great Dividing Range, and goes north into Queensland up to around these areas in the central parts. It only occurs in one sort of location naturally in Victoria, and they consider it to be a listed threatened species there. So because it's only in one location, naturally, they've listed it as threatened. It's in the east of Victoria, but it has been planted elsewhere in Victoria and naturalised, but they're not recognised as sort of natural populations, more like weedy populations or introduced. So that's really interesting. I find it's often on heavier soils. It can definitely be on clay soils with a shale influence, as well as volcanic, but you can also find it on sandy soils as well, especially on the south coast of New South Wales, which I'll show you in a minute. So it's tolerant of a variety of soils, but I just find it's mostly, if you see it, it normally means you got a bit of a clay influence in the soil. But quite a tolerant tree. You can plant it on a range and it grows really well. I've got some street trees here where I live. I'm on the Hawkesbury Sandstone and they grow no problems at all. Just a distribution map there. You can see a bit similar to Corymbia gummifera. This is where it goes into the Hunter Valley. This is a natural population in Victoria, and it's thought that all of these are sort of, they'll just be plantings, introductions. It's not natural to Western Australia. It's been introduced over there, and Port New Zealand's got it as well, maybe as a weed, looking at those records, and Tasmania. But that is sort of the natural distribution there. And there's a few records there that are confusing the picture, but yeah, sometimes it's hard to get a handle on what's going on here, but a bit of click on the dots and a bit of investigation and a bit of website research, you can see how you go and get a more accurate picture. So you're probably familiar with the trunks. This is what they're like. They're absolutely beautiful. They'll change patterns through the year. They will drop large amounts of bark when they do their decorticating once a year or once every 2 years. These bits will start peeling off and they'll fall to the ground. But basically, if you run your hand up and down that, you can't really pull anything off. It's a really nice smooth trunk. What I managed to capture was the outer calyptra on the buds and I've pulled it off there and just laid it in my hand, and then you can see there's new green in our calyptras. So this is one of the species that has two clear calyptrae or opercula on the flower buds, and you have a nice time pulling them off. And then they've got to shed a second one, and then the flower will open. I'd never observed that before. I'd just never taken the time to observe that, but I only got this shot yesterday. Really happy about it. So a lot of the Corymbias do this. Just the two bud caps that are going to come off. So that's the sepals, and that's the petals underneath. So really cool that. Couldn't get much in the way of flowers, but basically you can see what they're doing there. So the calyptra tend to be short and a bit sort of stubby. And in eucalyptus species, you can get some really long ones, which sort of do this sort of thing, and different shapes and sizes. But the Corymbias, they tend to be a little bit on the short side, at least the New South Wales species anyway. I didn't have a flowering shot, but basically this is what they look like. Off our plant database here, you can see the fruits there again, and these nice cream staminate flowers, probably produced in spring to summer, and probably a favourite with European honeybees and a whole heap of other insects, flying foxes as well. But even there, you can see that they're pretty much on the terminals or near the terminals of the plant. Oh, there's actually a honeybee there. I've only just seen it. So there you go. I swear I did not see that before. So that's a really good shot. Just some leaf features. Again, you know, probably about 15 centimeters long or thereabouts, a couple of centimeters wide to about 3 centimeters. And I have turned that leaf over, and you can see, we could argue about it, but it's pretty much the same shade of green on each side. I guess we can match it up to a paint chart and argue about it, but they're described as being concolorous. So that's just an example of concolorous leaves. Hardly any difference on the underside compared to the top side. And just a branch here, and you can see the clear alternate leaf pattern. So dunk to dunk to dunk, up it goes, nice and truly alternate. Sometimes you can have leaves sort of coming out around a 360-degree radius rather than 180 degrees. You might call that spiral. If they're sort of alternate and they're going up and around the stem sort of in this sort of pattern, you can call that a spiral leaf arrangement, but you might call this spiral to clearly alternate. So very different again to Angophora. This is, oh, I've blocked that with so much title there. This is a massive tree on the south coast of New South Wales. People might be familiar with this one. This is in Murrumarang National Park, I think, near a place called Depot Beach and near a place called Murrumarang Resort. Very nice place to stay. And this, I think it's mapped as the big tree or the large tree or the big spotted gum or something like that. But you can go and have a look. It's a real titan. It's probably 50 meters tall, maybe a bit more. And you can see that my brother-in-law here is about a meter, meter 75. We turned him sideways. It's got a trunk about getting up to 3 meters across. It's just huge. So go and see that one if you haven't. You can go down the south coast of New South Wales and you can get some absolutely majestic spotted gum forest. It's a real dominant species down there. And this is an area where the soil's pretty sandy. It's very sandy. It's not a nice rainy day here. There was a lot of leeches. You might call this wet sclerophyll forest. It's just got a bit of a mesic rainforest mid-story. And if there's plenty of leeches about, well, I tend to call it wet sclerophyll. Just 2 more shots of it, just because it deserves it. That's sort of the upper part there, and you can see that the trunk just keeps going, keeps shooting up right into there. So I'm just, pulling stuff here, but you might have hit 10 meters there, and then you might have hit 20 meters there, and you might have hit 30 meters there, and it just keeps going. It's a huge tree. Probably we could say 200 years old, maybe or more. It's quite popular for visitation. Now check that one out. Again, this is heading down the south coast. This is around Nowra. I just had to investigate this site, but again, we just had some really tall ones, and they were co-dominant with some other species of Eucalypt and Angophora as well, I think. But yeah, just some really big, tall spotted gums. Really distinctive, really nice, really easy to identify. Here's some threatened species work I did again in between the first site and the second site I showed you. This is down towards Murrumarang. You just get these beautiful spotted gum forests. They're really beautiful to visit. I love the south coast of New South Wales. It's just a lot more wild and less developed than the north side of Sydney, but there's just these glorious spotted gum forests you can go check out. Some patches have a real dominance of, and I think that's one there, of a cycad called Macrozemia communis. That's a burrowang. You just get a complete mid-story ground layer of burrowang underneath Corymbia maculata, and makes for awesome photos. I tried to do like one of those magical, canopy shots. But pretty much all this is Corymbia maculata. Real dominant. Beautiful. Going on to Corymbia eximia. I'm sticking to Sydney species, but as you might imagine, that's all I've really got photos for. And if you're further afield than that, well, hopefully the features just help you identify them anyway. This is a really prominent tree, again on the Hawkesbury sandstone country, in sort of the outer parts of Sydney, northwest of Sydney especially. And what I find interesting in these areas is things like Angophora costata tend to drop out a little bit, and things like Corymbia eximia become really dominant. Corymbia gummifera can be here as well, but there's a hell of a lot of Corymbia eximia. Again, it's got the full fibrous bark like gummifera, but it tends to have these light brown yellowish tones, and I think that's why it gets called yellow bloodwood. So just look for that. I should have said earlier, I believe they're called Bloodwoods because of the red resin or the red gum that they exude from the timber at times. Corymbia gummifera is called gummifera because it's gum bearing. It has some red resin that comes out. Some people have commented that it doesn't release a lot of red resin, but that's a name for Corymbia gummifera. Corymbia maculata is named for the spots, and Corymbia eximia, I've forgotten at the moment what the derivation of that name is, but someone can punch it into the comments and let me know. I have covered it before, but right now I forget. But it's got these beautiful yellow tones. You can see the odd street tree in Sydney. They are used for street trees. They're quite a beautiful street tree, I think. They don't get overly large. They don't tend to really fall over or drop limbs. They can be kept to about a 10-metre tall size, and they've just got these really distinctive trunks. They're nice. It's endemic to New South Wales. It's confined to the Greater Sydney Basin, down around Nowra, north through the lower parts of the Blue Mountains to the Hunter Valley. And it includes all this northwestern part of Sydney, like Wiseman's Ferry and past State Conservation Area and places like that where I've done a few threatened flora surveys. I wish I had some better photos, but the leaves are this really distinctive bluey green colour. They're long. They can be about, say, 3 centimetres wide or so, but they can get really long. You can get leaves about 30 or 40 centimetres. They can be that long, and this is just a sapling that was at the start of my monitoring plot. They've got these really distinctive yellow petioles, which I really like, and a really distinctive yellow midvein. And in this sort of country, it makes them easily identifiable. You can't really confuse it with too many other eucalypts. That's just a distribution map. I can stick to PlantNet here because it's just confined to New South Wales. I'm not sure what's going on there. Didn't check that one out. Probably a mistake. And if you want to go to the Australian map, you just click that AVH link. So it's saying North Coast, Central Coast, South Coast only for this one. I'm not really focusing on the GPS there. I'm focusing on the leaf. I did find specimens a bit closer to Sydney than what had been recorded last year. I found trees growing in if you know this part of northwestern Sydney, in Castlereagh Nature Reserve at Cranebrook there, and there were no records that close to sort of the Sydney CBD in that part of the world. So I made a collection, I gave it to the herbarium, and they were very happy to get it because it just extended the known range towards the Sydney CBD. They were just growing there as sort of stunted trees, not really doing much and not really dominant, but they were there in amongst the other sort of dominant eucalypts. So that was a lot of fun, but it's just showing you that leaf characteristic there. You've seen that one, but just some leaf shots. Here's some typical habitat shots. This is getting up towards Wiseman's Ferry in Sydney. Bit of a poor photo, but basically every tree here on this sort of upper sandstone platform, Hawkesbury sandstone, they're all Corymbia eximia, all of them. Just the leaves are just much longer and a bit more falcate, bluey green compared to Corymbia gummifera. So to me, they're quite easy to tell. And again, this is a sort of habitat they can grow in. That would be more trees growing up there. This really dramatic and rugged sandstone country on the northwestern outskirts of Sydney. And again, you got trunks with these yellow hues. Quite easy to tell, Corymbia eximia. This is just a monitoring plot for some threatened flora, but I'm just trying to again demonstrate the bluey green nature of the leaves. They're just so different to anything else that grows out this way. So just have a look for those. You can even see the yellow petioles in that shot. You know, the plant's about 5 meters away from the camera or 7 meters away. You can see the yellow petioles and the bluey green leaves. Weeping a lot of the time and just really long and genuine. They're sort of eucalypt leaves you can use for a bookmark. Someone sent me some photos of a street tree in Sutherland Shire and wanted it identified. And as soon as I saw that, I said, it looks like Corymbia eximia. And I'm just using Karen's photos because she also got it in flower. So that's what the flowers look like. I swore I had a heap of Corymbia eximia photos, but I don't. But that's what it looks like in flower. Nice fluffy white flowers. Really nice. Again, you can see the sort of weeping branches, yellow petioles, nice blue-green leaves. I had to borrow a shot of the capsules from the Botanic Gardens. So this is taken by Andrew Orme, a really good botanist. You can see the shape of the fruits there. Very like Corymbia maculata, possibly a bit bigger in size. But again, they've got that typical Corymbia look with the inserted valves. So I'm nearly done. I really wanted to profile this one, and you can imagine I can't find my photos, but this is Corymbia trachyphloia. It's a plant I've seen a lot of in these inland parts of New South Wales. Again, I would ignore these records here. You know, that's probably a tree planted in the Adelaide Botanic Gardens, and that's the Melbourne Botanic Gardens, and that's the Canberra Botanic Gardens, and that's the Sydney Botanic Gardens. Probably documenting a planted tree, but this is where you find it in New South Wales. If you go out to the Pilliga Scrub near Narrabri there, if you go out to parts of, it's a Pilliga or Mount Capitar National Park, I think, on the sandy flat country, Jacks Creek State Forest, and I've also picked it up around Denman and Sandy Hollow. It grows around there as well on the very southern part of the range. This is where you'll find it. And then in Queensland, it seems to just happily grow along the coast in the hotter sort of weather. It's a really nice tree. Hope this works. Just got my slides mixed up, but yeah, I've edited that. Yeah, it's got these really cute fruits. I just love it. I can't help but call them cute. This is a photo by Murray Fagg I've borrowed, but they're about 1 centimetre long, and they're about 5-6 mil across, and that just makes them really different to Corymbia eximia or gummifera or even maculata. They're just really nice and tiny. So if you're out that way, north of the Goulburn River in New South Wales, Hunter Valley, inlands and coastal Queensland, yeah. It can get up to 25 metres tall, but you'll see these, if you're in the Pilliga Scrub, you'll see these definite Corymbia looking trunks. You can't mistake them, and it can only pretty much be Corymbia trachyphloia as far as I know. So that's a white bloodwood. I thought it was called the orange bloodwood or the brown bloodwood. The trunk colour is sort of, yeah, pale brown to yellow brown, but it's got that typical tessellated bark. So look out for that if you're in the out that way in New South Wales. It's another really nice tree. Could probably be used as a street tree too. All right, wrapping it up, folks. I'm trying to stick to 40 minutes. I'm not doing too bad a job. You might be familiar with some other ones, Corymbia aperinga, if I pronounce that one right. That's a famous ghost gum of inland Australia, made famous through artwork by various artists. They're really just startling white trunks in that inland sort of desert area. So that's a really well-known one. I'm not sure how it goes in cultivation, but it's a really prominent tree out that way. Corymbia citriodora. This is one that's been used extensively in urban landscaping, maybe in decades past, so maybe from the 70s and 80s or earlier. You can see them in Sydney, and I'm sure a lot of other suburbs and cities as well. They've got beautiful white to pinky white trunks. They grow pretty tall, and they've got a really narrow foliage. The foliage is probably about a centimetre wide, and maybe the leaves are, I don't know, 10 centimetres, 15 centimetres long. They droop down, they weep, they smell like lemon. So I'll take it back that some Corymbias do have nice odorous leaves. This one certainly does. And people will tell you they're known for dropping large branches at a second's notice. So they get called widow makers. So people who have large ones in their front yards, backyards, they get really worried about them during storms and things like that. They've fallen out of favour a bit, but they have been used in landscaping in the past extensively. You can still see some big old city trees around. You see them in parks as well. Corymbia torrelliana, this is one that's been planted a bit outside its natural range. It grows in the north of Queensland, but it's been planted well and truly far beyond that. And it has naturalised in bushlands where it shouldn't really be. I've seen it in the north coast, sort of Tweed area of New South Wales, acting as a weed. It's got a really prominent sock of fibrous bark, a really short sock, and then it's got a smooth trunk, which can be a very nice shade of sort of dark grey to bluey grey, or even greeny sort of bluey grey. It's a really got this really prominent coloured stem or trunk. They're quite nice. They've got these short, wide green leaves, which are sort of a bit on the thin side or papery side. And I've just been checking out a street tree in Sydney, just near me, which I thought might have been Corymbia something, but it ended up being Corymbia torrelliana. So they do very well as plantings, probably fallen out of favour a bit as well as we stick more and more to local planting. And you're probably familiar with the good old garden flowering gum now. The flowering gums that come from Western Australia, they're pretty much Corymbia ficifolia. That can grow into a nice tree with gaudy red flowers or orange flowers. What's happened is we've taken that plant and we've grafted it onto Corymbia maculata, or Corymbia tychocarpa is another one, for growing on the east coast. So a lot of these beautiful Western Australian things, we want to grow them on the east coast in our gardens, and a lot of them are a bit temperamental because of the humidity and the possibly the soils as well. So what we do is we take the species and we graft it onto an east coast species, which is closely related, and voila, they grow really well. So you can pay, $50 for your flowering gum or your flowering Corymbia. You can get red, orange, pink these days. I think you can get white as well. And they produce these massive capsules. They're about 3 centimetres long, and sometimes they're about 2 centimetres wide. They're quite huge and quite distinctive. They're really attractive, and they're used in all sorts of, artwork and craft and things like that, but they're quite nice. So that's your Corymbia ficifolia, which has, become a real star in the garden. All right, I'll wrap it up there. Thanks for joining in. I'll try and cover some eucalypts in the next couple of lectures. Might have to break them up into 2 or 3 just so we can get through some groups. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed it.